The Tampa Bay Rays are the smallest fish in the big pond that is Major League Baseball. Despite competing in a division of Goliaths, they've perpetually contended for over 15 years now. It's a miraculous example of what makes team building in baseball special. But that success didn't happen overnight. The Rays' modern philosophy was forged in the fiery depths of baseball hell and the frigid vastness of baseball purgatory for a decade. Before they were the calculated, efficient, and analytical machine, before they took home 2 AL pennants, and before they were called the Rays, they were nothing more than a laughingstock. They were embarrassing.
Oh boy.
They were a sideshow.
Hitting a woman pregnant with his baby.
They were painful to watch, but it was impossible to look away. They were a car crash. And Josh Hamilton was their biggest of many, many failures. Most people are familiar with Josh Hamilton's story. First overall pick falls in with the wrong crowd, battles addiction, and falls out of the sport, before an unthinkable comeback. His time with Tampa mirrors the development of the franchise as a whole, from promising and colorful with near limitless potential, to dank, dark, and hopeless, before an unexpected feel-good rebound. This video will take you chronologically through the ball club's development, including Hamilton's story and the other peculiar characters that make this team unique. The new identity of the Rays is a cold, faceless machine of baseball production, and it could only exist as an antithesis to the alluring losers that were the Devil Rays.
The Tampa Bay area is Florida's largest metro. Within 35 miles of the Dome, there are 1.7 million people, 2 million within 50 miles, and 4.4 million people within a 2-hour drive.
In retrospect, mentioning the number of people within a 2-hour drive of a sport played every day is pretty ridiculous. This is a clip from Tampa's 1991 pitch to host an MLB expansion franchise. Going into the 90s, MLB was looking to expand beyond 26 teams. In late 1990, 2 of Buffalo, Denver, Miami, Orlando, Tampa, and DC were to be selected, with the expectation that 1 Florida team and 1 non-Florida team would get a bid. The Florida Suncoast Dome, which you know as Tropicana Field, was built with the hopes of enticing a big league team to relocate. They came very close to getting the White Sox to Tampa, but the team and the city of Chicago agreed to build the new Comiskey Park in 1989. So Tampa's focus shifted to MLB expansion, with the Dome as their main selling point. Despite that advantage, the league went with Miami and Denver over Tampa. The Mariners threatened to move on from Seattle in the early 90s, before Nintendo bought the franchise and kept it put. Giants ownership even sold the team to a Tampa-based group, but the sale was blocked by MLB's other owners, led by Marlins owner and Blockbuster Video chairman Wayne Huizenga. As a result, Tampa residents boycotted local Blockbuster locations. Major League Baseball in Tampa had been shot down 4 separate times. Despite the 0-4 start, the stadium was built, prospective owners continued pushing, and the community rallied for one final chance at a team. Luckily, since the 2 expansion franchises were successful additions, the league once again looked to expand in 1994. On March 9th, 1995, Phoenix and Tampa were selected as the 29th and 30th MLB franchises. They were to begin play in 1998, 12 years after construction of the Dome began. No matter how badly the powers that be wanted this project to die, the city had done it. They got themselves a big league team. Now, all they had to do was build an entire franchise from the ground up. The Devil Rays signed a 30-year lease to play at Tropicana Field on April 17, 1995. Ballpark? Check. Chuck Lamar, former assistant GM of the Braves, was named the first general manager of the franchise in July. Front office? Check. To fill out their farm system, the Devil Rays took part in the amateur draft during the 1996 and 1997 seasons, and they were able to sign minor league free agents during those 2 years. Larry Rothschild, pitching coach of the World Series champion Marlins, was signed as the Devil Rays' first manager on November 7th of 1997. Coaching staff? Check. The Devil Rays were ready for the most important event leading up to their inaugural season, the expansion draft.
With their 8th pick of the 2nd round, the Tampa Bay Devil Rays select from the St. Louis Cardinals outfielder Kerry Robinson.
On November 18, 1997, in Phoenix, the D-backs and D-Rays selected 35 players each from other organizations in the league. Here are the rules. Pause now to take a look. Notable draftees selected by Tampa include Tony Saunders, Miguel Cairo, Randy Wynn, Bobby Abreu, and Dimitri Young. They also picked the White Shohei Ohtani. Brooks Kieschnick. But their highest profile move of the day came after the draft ended. The Devil Rays purchased the contract of future Hall of Famer Fred McGriff from Atlanta. Take a look at this potential lineup with their 1998 wins above replacement totals. The Devil Rays also had the 12th lowest ERA in baseball in 1998. What do you know? This team looks pretty damn good on paper. Only one problem. They traded some of these players away on the night of the draft. Now to check in on their real 1998 lineup. Wow. The Devil Rays traded away 4 players that they drafted in the expansion draft. Those 4 players totaled 8.8 wins above replacement in 1998. In return, Tampa got back 0 WAR of production, and that's just in 1998. Bobby Abreu on his own totaled nearly 50 wins above replacement during his 9 seasons in Philly. Within hours of their major league roster existing, the Devil Rays traded away one of the greatest players they ever employed. But as a consolation, here's Tampa legend and your new third baseman, 40-year-old Wade Boggs.
Okay, you asked for it, Boggs!
As with most expansion teams, this roster didn't have very high expectations, but the hype in St. Pete was real. All they had to do now was play the games. On March 31st, 1998, the Devil Rays hosted the Detroit Tigers during their first regular season game. Wilson Alvarez got the start, giving up 6 earned runs in 2 2/3 innings. Davey Martinez collected the first hit in franchise history in the 3rd, and Wade Boggs homered in the first runs in the 6th. But Tampa couldn't overcome the early deficit, dropping the game 11-6 in front of a sellout home crowd. The next night, the Devil Rays came to play, collecting their first win and outscoring Detroit 11-8 with Rolando Araujo on the mound. Somewhat surprisingly, they were 10-6 3 weeks into the season. After falling below 500 on April 27th, they never got back to a positive record on the season. To this day, the last time the all-time franchise record was above 500 was April 26, 1998. They have never been an above 500 franchise in my entire life. The rest of their inaugural season was rough. Tampa won just 63 games, finishing behind all but the fire sale Marlins on the year. Those 9 wins they traded away for nothing would have gone a long way. Tampa played a lot of close games, not scoring or giving up many runs. The pitching staff wasn't bad, as they allowed the 10th fewest runs in the majors. They also arguably had the best defense in baseball, leading the league in total zone. The problem was they scored the fewest amount of runs in baseball. Fred McGriff was the only above average hitter who played over 60 games. Araujo was the sole Devil Rays representative at the All-Star game, and the 32-year-old finished second in Rookie of the Year voting. The only notable player that the team selected in the draft that summer was future alpha male Aubrey Huff. In their first offseason, Tampa signed Jose Canseco to DH and sell some tickets. The aging core of Boggs, McGriff, and Canseco were here to keep the fans interested while the farm system developed. Tampa's #1 prospect at the time was pitcher Matt White, who ranked as the 6th best prospect in baseball. He still holds the record for the largest signing bonus in franchise history on a strange technicality. When he was drafted by the Giants 7th overall in 1996, your favorite agent Scott Boras used a loophole to make him a free agent just weeks after the draft. The Devil Rays outbid the field, signing him for $10.2 million. White had a pretty good season in 2000, rising up to AAA and keeping his ERA under 4 in the high minors. In a somewhat bizarre decision, the Devil Rays allowed him to pitch in the Sydney Olympics after the minor league season. White hurt his shoulder, leading to an ERA over 7 at AAA in 2001. This was after they allowed him to throw over 170 innings as a 19-year-old in 1998. Tampa was strangely aggressive with their prospects at the time, and White's usage was the first failure of that strategy. A top 10 prospect in all of baseball, groomed to be the first true ace in Devil Rays history, never once stepped foot on a major league mound. After the buzz of a new team wore off, the residents of Tampa were left with a handful of interesting faces and an overall mediocre baseball team. This chart shows the team's year-to-year win total and payroll, as well as their attendance rank in MLB, which is inverted so that lower means worse. As you can see, the Devil Rays won 6 more games in their second season than their first, coinciding with the rising payroll. Though their attendance rank fell into the bottom third of the league, the roster was still a collective of mediocre youngsters and aging sluggers, and the foundation of the team hadn't really solidified. On May May 26th, Tony Saunders took the mound for his 9th start of the year against the Rangers. After a very strong first season in Tampa, he had a chance to solidify his role as the team's first ace. But he was off to a rough start so far, and his 3rd inning against Texas only continued his struggles. After allowing a homer and 3 singles, he had a chance to escape the jam with minimal damage. Reigning MVP Juan Gonzalez stepped up to the plate, working the count full. With the next pitch, Saunders could hold the lead and save his stats, or the inning could snowball into another loss and possible demotion. With his season on the line, Saunders delivered.
It's a wild pitch back to the screen. Saunders is hurt. A wild pitch because something in his arm snapped.
This moment defines Tony's career. He made the bigs after going undrafted, winning a ring in his early 20s. Going 1st overall in the expansion draft, he was the first actual big league player in Devil Rays history. His entire legacy wiped away and rewritten in one single pitch. Fans at the Trop on that Wednesday evening still remember the sound of his arm breaking. I've covered this type of injury on my channel. This is one of just 5 times it's happened to a big league hurler, and I think it shook this team to its core. They were just 2 games under 500 entering the night. Starting on that day, the Devil Rays lost 12 out of 14, completely falling out of contention by mid-June. The pitching staff couldn't overcome this loss, as they fell into the bottom 5 in runs allowed in the majors. Rolando Araujo was not able to recapture the same excellence that made him an all-star in the year prior. It didn't help that the Devil Rays defense went from 1st to 2nd worst in terms of total zone. Though their offense was marginally better, it was largely carried by Fred McGriff and the all-star Canseco. Canseco was on a 69 homer pace through June 19th, and he hit 31 long balls in the first half of the season. Unfortunately, he hurt his back the week before he was set to compete in the home run derby. He needed surgery, knocking him out for 6 weeks and ending his bid at the AL home run record. 41-year-old Wade Boggs hit a homer for his 3,000th hit on August 7th before playing his final game on August 27th.
3,000 base hits for Wade Boggs.
He was there to reach that milestone while playing in his hometown. He didn't have much to give beyond that. With Boggs gone and the team out of contention, Jim Morris was just about the only reason to watch this team in September. The 35-year-old hadn't played professional ball since the 80s, and the highest level he reached at the time was A-ball. After winning the state championship, the players on the high school team that he coached inspired him to go and try out at a showcase. He threw about a dozen fastballs around 98 miles per hour. The Devil Rays had scouts in attendance.
He threw 12 98s in a row.
And they liked what they saw, so they signed him. Morris made 5 appearances for the big league club that September, completing a true Hollywood underdog story, and that's exactly what it became. The movie, based on the events of that season, ended up grossing over $80 million worldwide, which is more than the Devil Rays ever spent on player payroll in a single season. Dan Wheeler, a 34th round pick from 1996, also made his debut that September. That shouldn't be notable, but he was the only pick made by Lamar in his first 3 drafts to make a major league impact. The 1999 draft was Lamar's chance to flip the script. The Devil Rays picked 1st overall. Their 2 options were Josh Hamilton and Josh Beckett, 2 of the most talented high schoolers ever. As you know, they went with the outfielder, Hamilton, and then they picked Carl Crawford in the 2nd round. In back-to-back rounds, Lamar signed 2 of the only great talents he ever drafted. During the following offseason, they took a more aggressive approach, trying to keep up with their expansion counterparts in Arizona, who had just won 100 games. Tampa brought in Vinny Castilla to replace Boggs at 3rd, trading their first all-star Rojo to do so. They also signed slugger Greg Vaughn to play left, replacing fan favorite Bubba Trammell. For the first time, the team's payroll was pretty high, as were expectations.
Terrell Williams standing in for the right-handed side, and the first pitch of the new season is swung on and belted deep to left field. It is gone! Terrell Williams on the first pitch of the new season with a bomb to left field.
After beating the Twins 7-0 on opening day, the Devil Rays hit nearly 300 in April, slashing the 2nd best month in team history. Was this the beginning of a turnaround in Tampa? Was there finally a roster foundation worth building upon? Let's check the team's record at the end of the month to find out. Yeah, the offensive environment of 2000 makes these numbers deceiving. Their seemingly impressive month was exactly league average according to OPS+. For comparison's sake, let's check out the slash line the Tampa starters allowed during the month. Yeah, no team can win like that, no matter the offensive output. The Devil Rays' solid offense tailed off in May, but the starting pitching remained just as putrid. They won just 8 games during the month, 6 of them by a single run. Last year's underdog success story, Jim Morris, was cut on May 9th. The back end of the rotation consisted of a washed-up Dwight Gooden and a group of subpar replacement-level arms. Canseco was waived and claimed by the Yankees in August after an injury-riddled half-season. On August 24th, during a minor league rehab start in St. Petersburg, Tony Saunders snapped his humerus again. He retired from baseball at just 26 years old. The Castilla trade ended up as a disaster. He hardly played a half season's worth of games, and when he did play, he was the worst hitter on the team. Greg Vaughn's deal ended up working out better, but he still missed out on about a month of play. This team got a lot more expensive, but was as mediocre as ever. They doubled their inaugural payroll, but still couldn't crack 70 wins. Their attendance fell even further, finishing 27th in the league. Lamar drafted Rocco Baldelli and James Shields in June, but just about every other move the team made in 2000 was a total mess. That includes the signing of Gregory "Toe" Nash. This may be the most interesting and strange story of Devil Rays baseball. Nash did not go to high school and hadn't played organized baseball since he was 14. He was completely off the grid, living without a birth certificate or social security number. Nash couldn't read, couldn't write, and had never been out of his hometown of Sorrento, Louisiana. If Benny Latino never discovered him as a kid, it was possible that nobody outside of that town would have ever known he existed. Latino showed up to a game in which a teenage Nash struck out 17 batters and hit 2 homers. And once he was a scout for the Devil Rays, he ventured back, looking for the same talent he witnessed years prior. He found Toe playing in the semi-pro Sugarcane League, and the Devil Rays brought him to West Virginia for a tryout. He impressed scouting director Dan Jettings with his switch-hitting power and mid-90s fastball on the mound, so the team signed him for just $30,000. This story was so unbelievable that other teams thought it was a myth or a prank. Toe Nash was like the made-up April Fool's prank that was Sid Finch. He was like the natural in real life. The only other prospect in the farm who could hit a ball like Nash was Josh Hamilton. Those two young outfielders were just about the only thing the Devil Rays hopeful had to look forward to. They had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The D-backs fired Buck Showalter after winning 100 games in 1999 and 85 games in 2000. Larry Rothschild hadn't won 70 games in any of his 3 seasons in Tampa. Chuck Lamar had a bad draft almost every year, but he'd keep his job for another half-decade. It was clear which of these teams actually cared about winning. Even with the lax management, Larry's club needed to show something in year 4.
Down 8-7, Tony Batista. The man just broke his bat, and he's still at a home run. That is ludicrous.
They lost 7 straight games after opening day. Rothschild was fired on April 17th after a 10-0 loss to Boston, and bench coach Hal McRae took over as the manager. McRae is an interesting man. He was a fiery player on the excellent Royals teams of the 70s and 80s. Hal took over as the Royals manager in the early 90s, and that tenure spawned one of the craziest tirades I've ever seen on video.
Brett for Miller with the bases loaded in the 7th.
No, don't ask me all these stupid-ass questions.
Why the fuck would I hit Brett for fucking Miller? Brett is not playing against left-handed pitchers. Why the fuck would I bat for Miller? You think I'm a goddamn fool? I'm tired of all these ass questions every night. And stay out here asking all these dumb ass questions. Ask me that stupid ass shit every can pipe and smoke. Try to be fucking nice and courteous, and you up and take advantage of the situation. I'm sick and tired of all this bullshit. Now, put that in your fucking pipe and smoke.
21 F-bombs, 6 objects thrown, 1 handle of vodka, and 1 lacerated reporter. The 7-12 Royals went on a 25-13 stretch after this rant, taking lead of the AL West in June. But his motivational skill set did not translate to Tampa. After going into the All-Star break 27-61, they traded away McGriff to the Cubs, receiving almost nothing of real value in return. Vinny Castilla was released in May, officially marking him as the worst to ever do it for this ball club. On the season, Tampa scored the fewest runs in the American League and allowed the 2nd most runs. Not only was the big league club a disaster, but 2001 was a dreadful year for the farm system. Yeah, 2001 was the year that Josh Hamilton's drug problems began. After a solid start to his minor league career, Josh and his parents were involved in a car crash that kept him off the field and his family away from his side for the first time in his life. He spent the newfound free time at a tattoo parlor parlor surrounded by bad influences. This is where Josh picked up alcohol and cocaine addictions, but the first chapter of Josh's descent wasn't even the worst thing that happened to a Devil Rays prospect in 2001. Toe Nash was too good to be true. A 6'5", 19-year-old switch-hitting power bat who they got for next to nothing just because some scouts saw him play when he was 13? He was raw, striking out a ton in rookie ball, but the power potential and athleticism was undeniable. But it turns out it was definitely too good to be true. Nash returned home to Louisiana after the season. Hardly 5 minutes after getting home, he slept with a 15-year-old girl. Even though the aggravated rape charges were dropped and Nash agreed to a plea bargain, getting out with a suspended sentence, the Devil Rays still immediately released him. He could have been the Natural or Sid Finch in real life, but his poor decision-making doomed him to a life of obscurity. Tampa only had a handful of truly talented prospects after the 2001 season. Even fewer remain without any character concerns or off-the-field issues. Their expansion counterpart Diamondbacks finished off the season by winning the World Series. The D-Rays and D-Backs had the same starting point. Just 4 years later, one team was on top of the baseball world while the other was washing away in baseball's gutter. Lamar's payroll was never quite as high as Arizona's, but after spending a good amount of money and completely failing to make any sort of progress in the previous 2 seasons, the Devil Rays drastically cut back on the spending. Speaking of cutting costs, I have not yet introduced you to the original owner, founder, and CEO of the team, Vince Naimoli. He's probably 95% of the reason why Tampa Bay has a team. He nearly brought the Giants to Tampa Bay, and when that fell through, he never gave up, pushing heavily for the expansion bid. Naimoli was a hero to so many people in the area for seeing that unlikely dream through to completion. However, as the team owner, he was incredibly cheap, hands-on, and brash. For example, he initially wanted the team to be called the Stingrays, but the trademark belonged to a Winter League team in Maui. Rather than pay $35,000 for the name, he opted to call the team the Devil Rays, which rubbed a bunch of Christians the wrong way. As we'll see, they may have been onto something. The point is, Naimoli spent $180 million on the expansion fee, then refused to shell out just $35,000 for the team name that he wanted. He proceeded to ignore community feedback that largely preferred Manta Rays, or just Rays, opting instead to controversially have Devil in all of his branding. He was just that type of man, my way or the highway. And I will say, the Devil Rays is a pretty badass name, and I absolutely love the team's original branding. Maybe, sometimes, Naimoli was actually the smartest person in the room. Beyond branding, he had final say on hiring, firing, sponsorships, front office operations, accounting, and more. He was so deeply involved in the operations and identity of the early Devil Rays teams that his personal decisions caused multiple PR disasters. One time, he invited the St. Petersburg High School band to perform the national anthem before a game. When the band showed up, they were told they needed to pay for tickets. The performance was cancelled. Naimoli didn't pay for either internet access or email until late 2003, as he believed email was nothing more than a fad.
Mark my words, nobody will ever use email. The internet is a fad for nerds.
This made it exponentially harder for employees to sell season ticket packages or get into contact with sponsors. He also notoriously enforced rules to prevent outside food and drink from entering the stadium, firing any ushers and security that let fans slide, with 0 exceptions. One time, an elderly diabetic woman wasn't allowed to enter the stadium with her dietary cashews because the security staff was afraid of being fired. This forced her and her husband to sit on the hot tour bus for 4 hours while their tour group watched the game. By 2002, Vince was in bad standing with the fans, and his policies were directly hurting the attendance. His business acumen didn't translate well from the private sector into the media and community-driven sports industry. He couldn't bully employees, fans, or the city and get away with it without alienating customers. After 2 seasons of spending with no success and declining profits, 2002 was the beginning of a true teardown and rebuild. Tampa went from a respectably bad team to a really bad team. Randy Wynn broke out with a near 5-war season in 2002, and Aubrey Huff had a fantastic year at the plate. Carl Crawford also had a decent showing in his first half season. Besides that trifecta, this team had nothing. They had one pitcher, one single pitcher above league average in terms of ERA+, and that was closer Esteban Yan, who had a .430 ERA. Wilson Alvarez and Greg Vaughn earned a total of $16 million, nearly half the team's payroll, but they combined to earn a WAR of negative 0.3. BJ Upton headlined another weak draft class in June. Even with terribly low expectations, Hal McRae's squad only mustered 55 wins, and he was fired after the season. After that season, they traded Randy Wynn to Seattle for manager and Tampa legend Lou Piniella. Trading away a 5-WAR player for a manager is not typical, but when has this team ever been so? Fans were greeted by pretty much the same old crappy roster in 2003, with an even lower payroll. Team attendance bottomed out once they started off slow, and once again, there were really no playoff hopes. There were some young and talented players like Rocco Baldelli, who debuted with a solid full season in center field. Julio Lugo ended up playing very well for Tampa after being cut by Houston, and they played near .500 ball in the second half, had the youngest club in MLB, and began to form an identity.
And a fly ball back into right, all the way back, and this one is out of here. Home run for Carl Crawford, and the Double A's pull it out.
They stole 142 out of 184 bases, finishing with the most steals at the most efficient clip in the league. It wasn't much, but they finished 2003 much stronger than they started. When the draft rolled around, Lamar selected Delman Young first overall, the second time he picked a high school outfielder 1-1. Let's check in on how the first was progressing. Josh Hamilton was invited to big league camp in spring training entering that year, with the expectation that he'd start alongside Crawford and Baldelli in the outfield. After showing up late to multiple spring training games and practices, he was assigned to minor league camp. He ended up leaving the team for weeks at a time with no contact, ultimately taking the season off for personal reasons and being placed on the restricted list. This was the first of 3 straight years when Hamilton didn't play a single game. He failed a drug test in spring of 2004 and was suspended for a year. Josh Hamilton was spiraling, and there wasn't much the team could do to help him. This is where my BetterHelp ad read was supposed to go. A few other sports YouTubers recently did ads for them, and they got a lot of, well, feedback. I decided against doing the ad read after researching the company, turning down the biggest payment offer I've ever received. Instead, I'm here to sponsor myself. I've just activated channel memberships on YouTube. For just $3.99 a month, you can support me directly. That's less than a quarter pounder with cheese, and you won't be paying me for nothing. You'll be getting my videos a day or two before the public, as well as having your name posted in the credits at the end of each video. I'll also be posting charts, thumbnails, polls, and other status updates to my community tab for members only. You also get a custom Yerminator badge next to your name in the comments, as well as custom emotes if I ever decide to start streaming. Most importantly, the extra support will allow me to continue being picky with my sponsors. If you really love my content and have a few extra bucks to spare, I would really appreciate it. Thanks. The 2004 roster had a surprising amount of talent compared to the years past, especially in the lineup. For the first time, the majority of the lineup was at or above league average. Newly acquired veterans Jose Cruz and Tino Martinez formed a powerful middle of the order. Youngsters Huff, Baldelli, and Crawford brought a good mix of power, speed, and defense. BJ Upton was called up at just 19 years old, and he was pretty solid, as was fellow rookie Jorge Cantu. Old friend Fred McGriff was even back in May, just 9 homers away from 500, but the 40-year-old just didn't have enough left in the tank. He homered just twice in 27 games, and was released for the final time. The pitching staff and the offensive depth were both pretty awful, so they held an otherwise solid lineup down to 70 wins. In general, this front office just wasn't very good at selling high and buying low. Scott Kazmir is the biggest exception to this rule. This trade is the biggest and one of the few successes of Chuck Lamar's near-decade tenure as GM. For once, Tampa sold high on an overperforming asset, bought low on a highly talented player, and took advantage of a desperate team. The Mets believed Victor Zambrano would patch up their pitching staff for a playoff run, despite the fact that they were sub 500 at the time of the trade. By late August, 20-year-old Kazmir was pitching in the bigs for Tampa, and Zambrano was on the Mets injured list. Besides this move, the biggest success of the year was prospect development. In his first year of pro play, Delman Young murdered the baseball and swiped 21 bags at just 18 years old. Elijah Dukes, Johnny Gomes, and Jason Hamill all took big steps forward as well. 2004 was the first sign of true progress and direction after so many years of being stuck in the mud. A young, talented outfield, developing prospects, and a young ace to lead the previously wretched staff. There was finally some hope for the fans who had not yet experienced any on-field success. 2004 was easily the most successful season in Devil Rays history. For most teams, a 70-win season is flat out bad, but it was a 15-win improvement from their low point in 2002. But rather than spend big during the offseason, the front office stuck with the strategy of plugging holes with cheap, short-term veterans. They let Tino Martinez walk and traded Jose Cruz, replacing them with Travis Lee at first base and internal options in the outfield. Their lineup plans took an unexpected hit early in the offseason. While playing baseball with his family in November, Rocco Baldelli partially tore his ACL, meaning that he would miss at least the first half of the season. With him injured and Cruz gone, it would have been the perfect time to add an established outfield bat in free agency. Carlos Beltran, Maglio Ordonez, JD Drew, and Moises Alou were just some of the free agent outfield options. Even if they signed Beltran to the same deal he eventually got from the Mets, the Devil Rays still would have had the lowest payroll in MLB. The front office cheaped out, signing 31-year-old Damon Hollins to compete for the center field job. He'd only played 15 MLB games up to that point, but he ended up playing 120 games in 2005, and he shockingly wasn't any good. They also moved Aubrey Huff to right and signed one of the Alex Gonzalez's to play third. Despite the cheapness, the lineup was still pretty solid, ranking 6th in the AL in OPS. Johnny Gomes, who survived a serious car crash and a heart attack before making the bigs, became a regular in June, and he was their best hitter from that point forward. The biggest issue with the 2005 team was once again the pitching staff. Outside of Kazmir, who had a very good first full season at just 21 years old, the rest of the starters were absolutely terrible. 6 starters other than Kazmir made at least 8 starts, but only one of them had an ERA under 550. The bullpen was absolutely abhorrent as well. To make things even worse, Baldelli's bad luck continued when he tore his UCL in what's been described as a freak weight room injury during his rehab. After putting up nearly 6 wins above replacement before turning 23, with a chance to ascend to superstardom, Baldelli lost an entire season due to injury. The team's failure to take the next step was certainly not on the players or Piniella. Lamar's inability to find cheap talent, paired with the ownership's relentless penny pinching, stagnated the young team. Namoli was in the process of selling the majority stake in the team to the minority owner Stuart Sternberg, who was already making the financial decisions. When Piniella took this job, he was told that the payroll would increase as the team got better. But after improving by 15 wins across 2 seasons, he was still in charge of the cheapest roster in the league by far, with an even lower payroll than the previous year. Once Sternberg took over at the end of the season, Piniella was bought out of his contract, and the front office was completely cleared out. Lamar's tenure wasn't good. He drafted poorly, traded away some great talent, and never once built a great team. But it was almost impossible to succeed under the conditions he was given. In 2001, scouts wanted Mark Teixeira 3rd overall, but he was too expensive for Namoli, so they went with DeJuan Brazelton. In 2005, Lamar wanted Andrew McCutchen. Ownership overruled, opting for the cheaper but just as talented Wade Townsend. The small market GM has to thread the needle of both thriftiness and success. Lamar simply couldn't achieve the latter. Let's meet the man who did. Andrew Friedman was assigned the toughest GM job in any sport at just 28 years old. The young GM had to bring in a new front office staff, find a new manager, and deal with low clubhouse morale, all while maintaining a cheap payroll. He certainly had his work cut out for him. In mid-November, Tampa found its next manager, a man who would outlast his previous 3 predecessors' tenures combined.
I don't want to stand there and try to force you to act a certain way, because I really believe I'm not going to get the best out of you as a baseball player if I do that. I have one rule among the position players. I want you to run hard to first base. That's it.
Ty Wigginton, Russell Branyan, and Greg Norton filled out the batting order, and starter Edwin Jackson was acquired via trade from the Dodgers. The new regime didn't do much more than that during the offseason, and the payroll remained amongst the lowest in baseball. The team's hopes of playoff contention were once again dashed by the end of a dreadful May. Even though his first few months were unimpressive, Friedman's first draft as Tampa's GM was probably the best draft class in team history. On June 6th, he picked up Evan Longoria, Alex Cobb, and Desmond Jennings, amongst others. While the team's performance improved throughout June, they were still 10 games under 500 and a dozen games out of a playoff spot. Huff, Lugo, and Toby Hall were all pending free agents making decent arbitration money, so Huff was shipped off to Houston and Lugo and Hall were traded to LA. Tampa received Deoner Navarro and Justin Ruggiano from the Dodgers. But the big prize came from Houston, a young shortstop by the name of Ben Zobrist.
The throw to the plate, and it's a triple play! My, oh my!
Just a year and a half prior, it looked as if this rebuild was nearing its end, but another slow start brought about another deadline as sellers. The second half of 2006 was as bad as ever. The team mustered just 22 wins after the All-Star break. Baldelli was back in the second half and playing the best baseball of his life, and Crawford was a budding superstar, but the lineup had almost no juice besides them after the trades. The biggest bright spot of the season was Josh Hamilton returning to the field after staying off drugs since the previous October. His wife and 2 kids accompanied him on the road to help him fight his addiction, and he played in 15 games at Low A before getting knee surgery and sitting out the remainder of the season. Josh's return was a feel-good story, a dream come true. Meanwhile, Delmon Young's season was a nightmare. Coming off a year in which he won Minor League Player of the Year at just 19 years old, Delmon dreamed of making the big league roster out of spring training. Young was sent to AAA and told to see more pitches and improve his plate discipline. And it was true, his discipline did need work, but he was frustrated. He believed that he'd shown more than enough to earn a starting job in right field over Damon Hollins, and he was probably right. On April 26th, a replacement ump was calling the game between Durham and Pawtucket. Just watch the clip for yourself. Delmon was picked first overall, and he had an all-star big league brother to compete with. The 20-year-old was understandably anxious, and it's not hard to sympathize with his fear of failure, but what he did next was completely and utterly inexcusable.
And now he's been tossed from the game. Delmon just threw his bat, and the bat hit the umpire. Oh boy, that's a bad move by Delmon Young.
He says he never meant to aim at the ump, and he says he threw his bat and other gear backwards without looking, just to make an example. One way or another, this clip went viral. And in the eyes of the public, the Devil Rays drafted another $1 million talent with a 10-cent brain. Young received a 50-game suspension and served it without question, apologizing to the ump and his teammates the next day. After serving the suspension, he returned to form, swiping bags, hitting over 300, and smacking extra base hits. He even earned a September call-up at the end of the season, and played well in 30 games for Tampa. In those 30 games, Young drew 1 single walk. By 2007, the core of the lineup from a few seasons earlier was still playing well. Akinori Iwamura and Brendan Harris were brought in to fix the left side of the infield. This lineup was pretty damn good, but it's impossible not to imagine what it could have been. Josh Hamilton was picked in the Rule 5 draft and went on to have a fantastic rookie year with the Reds. Were there really 40 other players in the organization that were better than him? Maybe he did need to leave in order to flourish. The Devil Rays continued to give him chances all of those years, ultimately sticking with him at his lowest points. The most talented player in the history of this organization never played a single game for the big league club. Losing a potential Hall of Fame center fielder sucks, but he wasn't the only center fielder the Devil Rays lost in 2007. Repeated hamstring injuries limited Rocco Baldelli to just 35 games, but it was deeper than a recurring soft muscle tissue injury. Even after light workouts, Baldelli's muscles were seriously fatigued, and doctors didn't know what was specifically wrong with him. He was just 25 years old, and his profession, identity, and long-term physical well-being were all uncertain. Baldelli currently manages the Twins, and he's witnessing a few similar cases on his own team. Byron Buxton and Royce Lewis are 2 of the most talented players in baseball, but injuries have kept them off the field for the majority of their big league careers. Buxton especially has played for nearly a decade in this league, and he's barely ever had a healthy season. They should be superstars, but constant injuries have kept them off the field and limited their tools even when they do play. Baldelli is one of the few people who understands firsthand what it's like to have superpowers that he's unable to use.
We got word that Byron has a boxer's fracture of his hand. I feel immensely for him, what he's going through right now, because this is very tough on anyone. No one should have to deal with what Buck is going through right now, and none of it's through any fault of his own.
Manager Joe Madden continuously preached patience with his young talent. and the lineup once again displayed its potential. Missing Baldelli and Hamilton sucks, but the outfield was still dynamic and immensely talented.
Rays win! Home run, an opposite field blast off the bat of Delman Young.
On the pitching front, James Shields broke out as the second ace of the staff, and Casimir kept up his exceptional play. But just as always, the rest of the rotation and the bullpen weighed this team down. 5 separate relievers threw at least 40 innings, and finished with ERAs above 7. In late July, after another rough stretch of losing, Ty Wigginton, Seth McClung, and the struggling Jorge Cantu were shipped off in 3 separate trades. Grant Balfour and Dan Wheeler were brought in to shore up the bullpen as part of these deals. Unlike the Lamar regime, this front office had a legitimate understanding of this team's strengths and weaknesses. Nearly all of Friedman's acquisitions in 2007 were successful, and I haven't even mentioned the biggest story of the Devil Rays that year, new first baseman Carlos Pena.
That ball tagged by Pena. Carlos Pena with a Tampa Bay grand slam.
Nobody wanted this guy. Brad Pitt hated him.
You traded Pena? Yeah.
He was a top prospect years ago, completely flamed out of the league, and didn't even make the worst team in baseball. That's right, Pena signed a minor league deal with the Devil Rays and was demoted in late March. But Greg Norton got hurt during the last game of spring training, so Pena earned the 25th spot. And when he got that second chance, he had, by far, the greatest season in Devil Rays history. 1,000 OPS, 46 homers, 7 WAR. Pena finished 9th in MVP voting and was named MLB's Comeback Player of the Year. It was the first and only award a Devil Ray ever won. Before we close out 2007, I have to talk about rookie outfielder Elijah Dukes. I mentioned him a little while back. He was drafted in 2002, and he put up impressive numbers in the 3 seasons leading up to 2007. Back in 1996, Elijah's father was arrested for a second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Elijah's first arrest came a year later when he was just 13 years old. Living as a troubled teen with a poor family and incarcerated father, baseball was his only outlet. And here he was, 10 years after being arrested, starting in center field of Yankees Stadium on opening day. With Baldelli relegated to a DH role, Dukes homered in each of his first 2 games. It looked like the Devil Rays had magically found their solution to center field, but by mid-season, it was clear that his maturity and character were serious issues. The final straws with the organization came in late May and early June. Dukes and his wife had both been in legal trouble in the past for abusing each other. When Elijah sent his wife a picture of a handgun and threatened her and her children's lives over the phone, she sought a restraining order. Just a few weeks later, a teenager accused Dukes of impregnating her when she was just a 17-year-old foster child living with a relative of his. The Devil Rays placed him on the inactive list in June, only after he called into a local radio station and went on a 13-minute rant.
You know what, I grew up on the flip side of things. I didn't grow up with no silver spoon in my mouth and stuff. You know what, I had to go through a lot to get to where I am today. And all I want to say is that, you know what, every time you get to the top, you always have those hyenas want to knock you down.
Dukes was traded to the Nationals after the season. Another prospect with off-the-field issues. Another year with under 70 wins. Another league-low payroll. More now than ever, the young, talented core looked just a few steps away. So many successes across 2007, just for the team to finish in pretty much the same exact spot they'd finished each of the 9 years before it. But why couldn't the progress be made? It couldn't be, could it? Baseball is a superstitious sport, religious or not, spiritual or not. Planting devil at the core of the organization must mean something. It's like the giant red arrow pointing down a guaranteed rate field. Cosmic negative omens that set fire to the progress of these organizations. But after 2007, there was an exorcism in Tampa. After years of toiling in the basement of the stacked AL East, 2008 brought about a new era of Tampa Bay baseball. Owner Stuart Sternberg had talked about doing away with the Devil as soon as he bought the team. They became the Rays, as in rays of sunlight. Sternberg said that this was a chance for new beginnings, and he was absolutely right. Throughout the 10-year history of the Devil Rays, they had a winning percentage below 40%, which is worse than any other MLB franchise by far. Once the old name and identity were left in 2007, the organization's luck turned around seemingly by magic. On August 10th of 2008, they set the franchise record for wins in a year, and the attendance numbers jumped up to their highest level since their inaugural 1998 season. Since becoming the Rays, Tampa has a win percentage of 54.6%, which is second only to the Yankees in Major League history. The biggest move of the offseason was the trade of Delman Young. Young played every single game in 2007, finishing second in Rookie of the Year voting, so this move was somewhat surprising. The Rays got back shortstop Jason Bartlett and starter Matt Garza in return, and a move that kicked off MLB's ultimate and still active trade tree. Reliever Troy Percival and DH Cliff Floyd both signed one-year deals. The team's offense actually finished with fewer runs scored than in 2007, but their pitching went from worst in the American League to second best. They finally had a solid 5-man rotation, rounded out by the Garza addition, along with improved infield defense. Thanks for everything, Delman.
It's been great knowing you, SpongeBob. Good luck somewhere else.
Joe Maddon managed the bullpen exquisitely, getting the best out of Wheeler, Balfour, JP Howell, and more. Star third baseman Evan Longoria slugged his way into Rookie of the Year honors. Ben Zobrist finally figured it out at the plate, and Rocco Baldelli made his triumphant return to the field as a DH.
The Rays win the game!
Maddon's bizarre managerial techniques produced winning stretches, shook cold streaks, and brought the clubhouse morale to an all-time high. He shaved his hair into a mohawk to match some of his players after losing the first game of a big series in Boston. He frequently deployed the shift against pull hitters before it was cool. He was baseball's one and only hippie manager. While Piniella is a legend in his own right, Maddon's style is nearly the opposite.
Every game I manage like it's my last. And we're talking about practice, man.
He ushered in a completely new approach to in-game strategy and off-field morale building, leaving his mark not only in Tampa, but across all of MLB. The 2008 Rays cracked 70 wins for the first time, went above 500 for the first time, made their first playoff appearance, won their first division title, won their first division series, then faced off against the Red Sox in the ALCS. They were the Red Sox punching bag in the early years, both literally and figuratively. This was the Rays' chance to officially rid the Trop of its demonic past. And who did Maddon turn to conquer their greatest foe? 2007 first overall pick David Price. 3 first overall selections in a decade, and they finally got it right.
Ground ball to second. Ewenberg's got it. Rays are going to the World Series.
Well, that just about covers everything notable about the first decade of Devil Rays baseball. This is a remake of the first big project I made on YouTube. I really loved the concept, but the execution wasn't up to my current standards, so I decided to go for it. It was a lot of work, but it ended up being a lot of fun, so I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you're still here, over 45 minutes in, and you aren't subscribed yet, I think I've earned this one. Thanks for watching.